Let's get going. All right. Well, thank you all for coming back after lunch to uh, join me in talking about something I'm pretty passionate about, which is training. Um, before, as we get started here, I enjoyed the previous conversation on this track on how to bypass BitLocker, and I quickly realized that my conversation, my topic today is not going to be as technical. Although next year I am more than happy to talk about how people actually see things in the world and share a lot of research that I've done on how Roombas actually work. But that's a whole nother talk that is probably going to be a TED talk one day for us. But I'm happy to do that in the future. Today's talk, we're going to go over 6 things people do wrong in security awareness training. And don't get me wrong, there's going to be a lot of hopefully at the end. But I wanted to start off jumping in and saying, who am I? Why is Zack here? This is my first B-Sides. And what is it that I'm hoping to offer today? So I'll start quickly with my bio. Farm boy from the middle of Indiana, went to the big city in the big school and got a philosophy degree. And like most people who get philosophy degrees, I realized that the job market was very tough for me. So at the age of 22, hired myself. Haven't looked back. I've only had the privilege of working for myself over the years. Started a number of companies. Most recently, prior to Hook Security, where I'm the CEO and co-founder now, started the next schools in the upstate of South Carolina. So 2 high schools and a middle school for entrepreneurs. And it'll be self-evident throughout here, but I'm most certainly not a graphic designer. As a matter of fact, another thing that I did after listening to Dr. Adam Anderson's talk on how to start a business, I realized that I needed more graphics. So you'll see memes throughout here that are literally the first meme that I discovered when Googling something. For example, I Googled "Who am I?" meme, and this popped up. So I share this with you because it made me laugh, and it's not wrong, but it also has nothing to do with the presentation at hand. So I'm gonna jump pretty quickly into the 6 things we do wrong, because I have this intuition that most of you in the audience are aware vaguely or acutely of the things we do wrong with security awareness training. So the power of our presentation is not in that topic, but it's actually in how we go about thinking and addressing those in 2020. So let me back up and talk about something that I'm certainly incredibly passionate in, and that is public education. And I'd like to make a case that as we get going into understanding our own security awareness training, that it parallels a number of things that we've discovered in our public education model. So some people might call me a public education reformer or radical, but I don't think you can do that until you've really appreciated how we got the public education system, especially in the US, that we have today. And one way to think about it, one layer of analysis, would be to start back at the early 20th century and say, it was quite a miracle for us to go from having a population where less than 20% of the population was educated to 80% over the course of 50 years. That was a remarkable journey that we were able to do. And we did it through this mass production, batch processing, one-size-fits-all training. Now, fast forward to the last 40 years, and I'll kind of give you a heads up and continue to shock people because this is always shocking to me. 1980 was 40 years ago. Fast forward to the 1980s, we started seeing some really crazy trends in our public education, and that is we really couldn't get past an 80% graduation rate, or what educators like to say, rather than call it a push-out rate, they like to call it a dropout rate. We got to a 20% dropout rate, and that was largely nationally. There's some different states, different regions that responded differently to the public education models that we had. But basically, public education as it sits today, and that's true even in Greenville County in 2020, about 80% of the young people going through it do really well, and 20% struggle immensely. So I'd like to go ahead and make a sweeping claim. I'm happy to address this if you all are skeptical in the future, that we have built a corporate training methodology, and we have mirrored our corporate training based on the pedagogy, that is the way in which the methodologies and the way in which we educate people, from 1995 to 2005. So what we did when we came out with corporate training, in particular security awareness training, as part of the InfoSec environment, we just said, well, if it was good enough for how we learned in colleges and high school and middle schools, we're going to take those same ways in which we train and we're just going to put them right over into our corporate training experience. So you ended up with batch processing, one size fits all, rote memorization, training techniques in our corporate training space. So I say that to say, we all know in 2020, we need to start doing some things that are radically different. My passion in corporate training is to bring forward the latest in neuroscience and our psychology to disrupt the security awareness training space. I like to call it PsySec, or psychological security, as opposed to InfoSec, but that's not the point of this talk. What I'm against that backdrop, I want us to stop and appreciate the things that we really do wrong when it comes to our training, and there are many more than just 6, but these are the highlights. And I'm going to jump right in, and this right here would be the number one thing that we hear as an objection. So over the past few years, as I've been doing security awareness training, we often get this. Listen, there are a lot of things to do here in this organization. I appreciate security awareness training. I know it needs to be done, but we're going to get to it when it's convenient, right? I got to look at everybody's schedule. We're going to figure this out. There's a lot of things that have to come into play. And essentially, it boils down to a convenience argument, right? Whenever it becomes the easiest to do, that's when we'll strike and do it. So there are some questions that raises, of course, but primarily I want us to think, okay, if that's a symptom, if we're faced up against, and you're in an organization that just does security awareness training when it's convenient, we're faced with a series of questions, but I want to point out and pull a thread that says you might need to ask questions about your security culture at your company, at your organization. And even so, I would say most of the time, it's hard to figure out exactly why we're only doing security awareness when it's training if there's not even a clear decision maker or an owner within the organization on who's in charge of the company schedule and where this fits in. This is the meme that you get when you do convenience meme. Apparently, Karen wants to talk to the manager when it's convenient. The second thing that that you probably do wrong, or I'll say we, it might be mean for me to point a finger at all of you, but I'll say we. It's kind of like the Seinfeld we. You only provide annual training, okay? And I get this, you're right, like for years, since the early 2000s, late 90s, when the security profession really became formalized, it was a best practice to do security awareness training annually, right? Like best practice is to go over everything once a year, right? But we have some issues with that. One of the first things I want to point out is like, how long does it take you, just you personally, I'm pointing at all of you on the talk, to forget new information, right? So I sometimes I like to do this. I'll go ahead and do it right now. But if I ask you right now, what was the first thing we just talked about 15 seconds ago? There's a number of you that will pause and have to concentrate and say, oh, we talked about convenience. Yes. But that information is just 20 seconds old. What happens to information when it's 300 days old, right? And how long does it take you to forget? And there's a whole body of research around how people actually, or what annual experiences do and how people remember annual experiences. And you have a part of your brain that remembers traditions. And that's a fascinating part of this narrative structure of our brains. I'm going to pause right there and say one thing just to level set on your neurology, what's going on in your head. As of late in the neuroscience psychological field, there's finally been agreement that you have multiple brains, kind of like you have multiple muscles in your hand. I think your hand has like 18 muscles. You arguably have somewhere between 5 and 9 brains that work together. So you don't have just one brain, you have a number of brains. And there's one of those brains that actually resonates really well with traditions. And it looks like if you want to set a memory or some way in which you remember things year after year, there needs to be food involved, there needs to be songs, there needs to be enjoyable experiences over time, and you can actually develop traditions. Well, think of it like Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving. Those are oftentimes traditions in our heads because those are annual experiences that have a lot of other things to them. I'm not aware of anybody having a set meal and songs and enjoyable experiences on like Veterans Day, right? And what happens is that you end up forgetting those traditions moreover than you do the other traditions. But I digress to say that if you're actually focused on creating security awareness across your organization at a habitual level, that daily all of the users in the organization are aware of when they're secure and when they're vulnerable, annual training does not hit that part of the brain and it does not work effectively there, even if it becomes a tradition in your organization. This is what happens when you type in annual meme. Apparently, every year he comes back. All right. Third thing you do wrong. You do it all at once, right? And this is usually just a practical matter. It's, hey, it's really hard to get our organization, no matter if it's just 2 or 3 people or 300, 400, several thousand folks. It's incredibly difficult to get anybody's attention on this. So when I get everybody's attention, I'm going to go over everything. Okay. Again, there's some memory errors, but I'm gonna point to what you really have is a coverage and dilution error. And what happens in training where you go over everything, frankly, if you go past 2, I know we violated that issue with 6 on here, but the subtitle of my talk is you might remember one of these 6 items. So pick one that you want to remember and that's what you'll keep. What you actually end up having is a coverage or dilution error. And that is when everything's important, nothing is important. And when you come to an organization, you say, listen, it's incredibly important that you lock your desk, clean your desk, make sure that you don't click a phishing email, make sure that you change your password, make sure that you're properly patched, make sure that you talk to somebody if you see this. If all of those things are equally important to the end user all at once and they're given to them all at once, it's impossible for those users to actually adopt those habits because they have you've diluted the effect of priority and what's important to remember, right? That's another memory meme. Number 4, I see this actually quite common. You avoid training executives and your contractors, right? People who have disproportionate influence to your organization, and it's just like, listen, don't get me started. Every security professional that I've met who is involved in awareness training at some level hates this argument, hates this fight. Zach, I get it. I don't know why you brought it up, but I argue all the time that the CEO needs trained, they need to do this too, etc. Well, I want to flip the script and make an interesting argument here that your executives, or one of the key things that we found with executives when you do studies, and small business owners and executives actually do perform different. So I won't get into the data there, but if you allow me to aggregate it all together, in general, executives, managers, leaders, and organizations are more open-minded when they feel empowered to know what's happening, right? So there's a curiosity level that is much higher in the C-suite than anywhere else. And that might strike you as odd because the C-suite might hit you back in a way that you think that they're not actually curious. But the data shows that fundamentally leaders and executives are curious. So when it comes to training, one of the big fallacies that training solution providers do right now is they train executives in the same way that they train other users and people in the organization, and they don't focus on the curiosity. Let me go ahead and give out one possible solution to this because it might help illuminate it for you. The difference between training people on how to lock doors and how to pick locks. Okay, when we approach executives and people in leadership, there's a level of how do you empower them so that they know they can do something with the information. So in an organization, traditionally, you just train people how to lock your doors. These are the things you need to do to be safe. Well, the data shows and the research shows that if you approach executives with that same material, there's often a tremendous drop-off of attention because it doesn't hit their curiosity. However, if you train them on how to pick locks, your executives will not only feel empowered and their curiosity will be met, but they will know also the importance of locking doors. So you end up with different content experiences for your leadership and for your managers. But that's one thing we do wrong is we rather not fight that fight, and we want to have one size fits all. And so we want everybody to go through the same training at the same way and the same time. So you are using old content. So this is a debatable thing out there. But I will say, if you are using the same training content year after year annually for your organizations, and it's 2 or 3 years old, and you know it is, but that's the library you purchased from some solution provider. You know it's bad. Everybody knows it's bad. It's the best that's out there, and you're using an old library. You're just like, does it even expire? My argument is yes, right? When running the schools like we were, I quickly made a ban forbid textbooks to enter the school. And that's because take for example, like a science textbook, the second you hit print on a science textbook, it's outdated, right? The delivery of a textbook to an end user at that point in time is just dangerous and sloppy. And so, like I like to point out when we're talking with folks about their content, do you even remember 2 years ago, just 2018, the most popular Netflix originals, right? And I usually ask this question out there, or even like Game of Thrones. Like we just went through a whole quarantine, and I think it's hilarious that nobody watched Game of Thrones, but that's because of a whole nother set of issues. But that's because the content we consume does have an expiration. It does have a shelf life. Most content is not timeless. But if you're curious, here are the top consumed, and Netflix doesn't actually release the data on this, so this is done by a third party. They say these were the top 5 in order. House of Cards didn't even make it, and you might have thought House of Cards, but these were the top 5 in 2018 consumed Netflix originals. The last thing that we see people doing wrong in their security training is they just do it for compliance purposes, right? And it's like, hey, all these guys are the same. Everybody is in the same. So we just do whatever it takes to be compliant. I've got other things to do. I'm in the middle of putting out 100 other fires every day. And we need this to be compliant. I don't care. It's just part of the cost of doing business. We're going to roll it out with the compliance motivation. And I do think this is one that requires a level of self-awareness by the security advisor or security employee, the security leader in an organization, wherever you fit. Understanding the motivations of your organization is paramount to being able to sidestep compliance motivation, which is you have to do it. It's not voluntary. It's compulsory. Get over it. Do this training. Each organization can be different, and this is the beauty of different organizations. And I would encourage you, if you're actually trying to sidestep and move away from a compliance motivation, there's something you probably need to do, and this might surprise you. You might actually need to survey and interview and talk with each of the individual users and employees. So one of the things that I think a number of organizations get wrong is they only leave the decision on how to be compliant to the leadership teams. And what happens when you get compulsory or involuntary adoption throughout the organization is the same thing you see with torture, right? Torturing, we have found out in the last few years, doesn't actually get information from the person being tortured. So if we're trying to take an actor and get information out of them, torturing is about the worst way to do that. What we've actually found is that torturing leads to people saying whatever they need to say to end the torturing immediately. And you can draw a very quick parallel between that and your compliance training, that people are just answering and doing whatever minimal viable thing they can do to be done with the compliance training. Whatever you think you need to hear, I will swear to you that I have never click another phishing email again. Cross my heart, hope to die. I will do everything. Just please let the compliance training move on so I can get back to my actual work. But if you actually bring the interviews and decision making on how to be compliant down further in your culture and in your organization, I think you'll discover alternative ways to motivate your company. So here's some data, because I know that you all are very interested in data. This is actually pre-COVID numbers. Some of the ways we do training are going to fundamentally shift with the remote workforce rise. However, I will say there are some trend lines in here that ILT and VILT, which is instructor-led training, video instructor-led training, those are on the decline as we move into different learning management tools. And I'm proud to say that our organization and a number of other organizations in the space are starting to actually personalize and customize the training down to the level of the individual. So those tools are coming out where we no longer do a one-size-fits-all, everybody gets the same training. We start giving different training experiences to different types of learners, different personalities, different groups and departments within the organization get differentiated training. So that's on the rise, and that's good to see. That's something I'm personally passionate about, and that's the work that I do every day. But I will talk about a surprising thing just to get you guys going if you're stuck in an organization that works with a compliance motivation. And that's simply to say, here's some data from, I believe the sample set's actually only about 1,000 employees, so it's not a large set. But you can see that employees do want to receive more training, by and large. By and large, people would like to know more, be better at their job, do more meaningful work day in and day out. But as you can see on here, if you tie in training with the opportunities to be promoted, which are higher, it's not just compensation along the promotion, but also recognition or more influence within the organization. If you tie in your security awareness training and your compliance training to people's motivations on being promoted, you can see that people actually demand this. Your users will demand it. So that is a cultural thing, a policy in your organization to champion, but I can always send you more data on exactly how to overcome number 6, but I figured this would help enlighten it. So I'll confess this was meme number 2. The first one, of course, is the original, but that's still painful for me. But help me, Zach. You're our only hope. You just told me in a very fast overview, there's 6 things we do wrong. True to form, I only remember a handful of them. I'll have to go back and look at your slides to try to remember all 6. But what could we do about these, right? So what? What do you do about these? And this slide actually has a lot of things to be unpacked, and I'm sorry I didn't make this one slide into 10 slides so that you could review them later. However, I want to start with a bit of inspiration. If you find yourself in an organization that's committing any of these 6 things, how do you even start having conversations in order to address these issues, these wrongs, as it were. And I think there's some interesting questions you can begin to ask yourselves when you benchmark your security culture against the rest of your culture and say, how do you integrate those two? You can just start asking, how many times do we have sales meetings in a week, a quarter, or a month, a year? And how often do we have security focused meetings, right? Or how much of our sales collateral brags about our security posture and environment at our organization? How much of our security position is being utilized to secure more revenues and help our company grow, right? How much of the things that we're doing internally with our security are helping our marketing team promote their digital properties and showcase what we do? Or how many times are you talking about with your current client base your security culture and the posture? And you'll notice that it becomes a lot easier to address these issues when these things are on your radar. And that might mean that you have to think of yourself differently within the organization, and there's a level of business acumen that you have to be empathetic to what's going on in the other departments, right? You'll have to get your head above all the fires you're putting out every day. But these are some questions I think that will really help gain the traction so you can address these issues, right? I do think I highlighted this as we went through, but this is just kind of one of those things that you might have, the data just shows you'll have to treat your executives differently and leverage their skill sets differently in the security awareness training, right? I'm not really going to get into skeptic versus critical understandings because there's a lot to unpack there when approaching an executive or someone that's higher up in the hierarchy and you're trying to advocate for different security awareness postures, trainings, programs, whether you're dealing with a skeptical leader or a critical leader. But at a high level, a skeptical leader has a standard and your goal is to meet that standard. A critical leader has no understanding and has no level in which a standard in which you can make them happy. And if you find yourself in a critical environment, you have to do a lot more work to get a little done. Like I've mentioned, show them how to pick locks, not to lock doors, use their curiosity against them. And I will say this in the long run, if you are utilizing fear-based tactics to get your executive's attention on your security awareness training posture, it won't get attention in the long run. Fear is actually built around short attention span bursts. So if you go to your executive and say, hey, if we don't do this, we're going to get hacked. We're 200% more likely to do blah, 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 right? You might get their attention for the next 15 minutes in a meeting, but you won't get their ongoing attention as they go back to the things that they can actually think through. So your job as a security professional, if you're trying to address these wrongs in your training apparatus, as it were, clarity is what wins. Going to them with clear thoughts on how this works, going to them with your benchmarks, going to them with what they can actually do and affect over time. So that goes into the next thing. Some of my recommendations: set small steps and milestones. Do the security awareness training before you answer tech support. That has to do with the policy, but essentially saying, while people are working with you, if they have a technical support issue or some sort of other support issue, when you're engaged in those conversations with those users is a great time to ask them where they are in their security awareness training progress, how they think about it, etc. And manage through security objectives and prioritize conversations. You're going to run into dilution coverage error if you try to solve all of your security awareness training problems at once. Okay, you just will. Pick your battles. That's another way to say this. The objectives that you really want to cover and aim at that. I have a mentor say that your calendar shows your priorities. So if you do have a company calendar, what is calendared wins? And those are the priorities of your organization. So I encourage you to keep a close eye on those on the calendar and make sure that your organization's priorities show up on that calendar. And if security awareness training is one, it should show up. All right. And and I and I'll always acknowledge that businesses, these organizations, Adam Anderson did this awesome talk about how to start your own. The business is irreducibly complex, right? Unfortunately, you can't just show up to business every day and say, hey, if we just do these one or two things right, everything will work. It's not how it works anymore. Unfortunately, there's a list of 100 things that a business has to get right every single day, and it's irreducibly complex. That's just what it is. And your security awareness posture might not be in the top 10 things that your company has to get right. It might not be in the top 20. You know, when I interview people and I ask them conceptually, where does security awareness training fit into the top 100 things your company has to do every day? They say somewhere between 60 and 80, right? And so when you're working through that, that's not always a bad thing. But the question is, does it get the respect it deserves at whatever level of priority it is in your company? And is that showing up on your company's calendars, right? Always take opportunities to interview the users, how they enjoy the security awareness training, how they're learning, what they remember, what they're intimidated by, how to help them do their work better. And I'll say this is just kind of a lasting idea. This is one of my soapboxes in security professionals and training in general. If you make other people better at their jobs and focus on their wins, you will avoid a number of these wrong issues when it comes to your training, right? If you help your field salespeople understand how that their security awareness training isn't just a defensive move, but it's an offensive move, that they can get more deals, have better conversations, move forward the ball, and de-risk not only the past things that the company's achieved, but the future. De-risking the future is the next foreground of our security work. And I think security awareness training, helping people do their jobs better and focusing on their wins, makes it happen. So Adam encouraged me to do this. I don't disagree. Like I said before, this is not a commercial for Hook Security, because if it were a commercial, I would say, hey, if you sign up for our giveaway, you're going to get an announcement on pre-ordering our book on psychological security. But this is not a commercial on pre-ordering your book on psychological security, so I don't want to sit here and tell you to pre-order the book. Sorry, that's a joke. I can't see anybody's faces, which makes this talk different. But if you sign up for the giveaway, you're welcome to unsubscribe and stop following us once the raffle's complete for the pineapple, Raspberry Pi, and an Apple product. But you'll get also an invite to a free course on how to use free tools to set up a security awareness training, either company, if you're looking at starting your own company, on how to, and you want to offer as a professional service security awareness training. I'm going to be doing, it's probably going to be somewhere around 2 to 4 hours. It'll get technical on how to set up phishing simulations, learning management tools, where to get the content, how to deliver it in what order. But it's absolutely free. It's free to you. And then I will show you how to use free tools that are out there on the market to put something together. So I think that'll be highly valuable. Expect that to come out sometime in July. But if you sign up for the giveaway, that's the emails we'll use to notify people of that upcoming course. Lastly, I saw that most people put on their B-side slides their Twitter handles. Here are my Twitter handles, and just note that they're inactive. They're either a bot or they're promotional. So with that, that is the end of my presentation here. Hopefully you're able to capture some things and get your head thinking through some epiphanies. But I would love to process any questions that you all might have and go from there.
And attendees can take themselves off mute to ask questions.
Are there questions into the Discord as well? Should we check there or no? Cool.
Hi, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep. We can hear
Okay,
you.
great. So my question is around if you have, regular campaigns or content around security awareness. So what's the length of that content or training each time you deliver it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So on the regularity of it, I'll say if you're trying to help your organization form patterns, pattern recognition comes somewhere around 14 to 21 days. So, that loosely lines up with monthly. That's what we do with our organization is train out monthly. But that's rounding up. If you're a purist with the data, you're going to try to build habits around 21-day schedules. So that's the first part. The second, it depends on what part of the brain that you're trying to engage with the training. So to make it real simple, there's cognitive processes and there are psychological processes. If you're trying to engage people to think differently and engage the frontal cortex and the cognitive pieces, your training can be detailed and it can be, we actually have a longer attention span than we thought. TVs and commercials actually assume the wrong thing about how you think about things. That training can be up to 8 minutes. As long as it's focused and engaging with the cognitive part of your brain. If you're trying to teach people to recognize things like phishing attacks, you should really focus on really low vision opportunities, which are humorous narratives or tragic narratives that are less than 90 seconds. And you can see some data that you really only get 6 seconds pure contact with there's two parts of your brain that you're engaging, your amygdala and your hippocampus. So if you're training monthly and your goal is to get people to think differently, you shouldn't be afraid of content that goes up to 8 minutes, including any sort of assessment. If you're trying to get people to recognize things, your training should be less than 90 seconds and it should be humorous or tragic. That's my understanding of the current data.
Okay, thank you. I have one other question.
Yep.
So how do you help people in business to see the correlation between their personal lives and security and what they do in business? Because often with security awareness, I find people in business, like when, okay, here's the compliance people, here's that phishing test that's coming out again, and then they just sort of get through it, but they don't see, not that they're perfectly focused on security in their personal lives, but sort of how you get them to see the alignment of the two so they're more motivated to be secure inside or outside of the house, if you will.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. And there's going to be part of my answer that is not that helpful. But you're tagging on perhaps a psychological phenomenon known as the Hawthorne effect. And the Hawthorne effect is simply this. It's best demonstrated by a study where they would have a honor system for coffee set up in a work lounge. And, coffee was 50 cents. And what did they discover? Well, about over time, if you do the study enough, about half the people will pay for the honor coffee, right? And they typically will prepay. They'll put in $1 and maybe, get 2 cups, or, they'll forget about it and put $1 in every day because they know other people aren't paying. But about 50% of the people will pay and not pay. That tends to be a good breakdown of the data. What happens if you put a security camera right above the coffee machine? Well, you find that about 100% of people start paying, right, overnight. But here's the interesting thing. if I set either a stuffed animal or a set of like googly eyes on top of the coffee machine, you know the compliance rate there with people who will pay in the honor system, 100%.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So because once people feel like they're seen, they do different behaviors. So if people do not feel seen, they take different types of risks. They don't get less risky. They just take different types. So all they have to do is feel like there's some sort of living thing looking at them, and they change their behaviors. So one of the things that you see between people moving from, business environments in which they're monitored and they feel seen to unseen things like in their own personal lives is the googly eyes go away, right? So I'm going to offer it up as a challenge. I think there are ways in which we could help people understand that they're being seen while still at home. You asked the exact right word. You said, how do you help people see things? Helping people see things is one of the great challenges of the training industry. I will say that there's probably tools and ways in which you can enlighten your users on how they're being seen, right? So or let me back up. Rather than telling people all the dangers of what happens when their data is sold, et cetera, and, most of your personal users go home and use, Alexa or Google Home or something. Actually, my Alexa just turned on when I said that. You start to show them what that means and how people are watching them at home on their other devices, and helping them realize what data is actually getting out and what is not. So breaking it down from a big scary boogeyman that they can't do anything about to something that's a small little dragon that they just need to make sure they know they're being watched is probably a great strategy. But the tactics in there, I'll say, are still on the frontier of psychological training. That's why you don't like my answer in full.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I perform a quick Zoom poll and ask you to use the Zoom reaction to raise your hand to indicate if your company that you work for exhibits the problems that Zack identified at the beginning of the presentation? All right. I've never heard the analogy before between security awareness training and torture. That's the first time I've heard that analogy before. Are there any other questions for Zack today?
I did get one in the Zoom chat that I can share out, where it did have a question about frequency, where how to, I'm going to read into it, but it says, seems the frequency could easily get too frequent where members revolt. Any advice on how to balance memory versus training pushback? Yes, you're absolutely right. If something seems to be taking a greater priority than the organization's culture lens, then the organization has to push back. So if you are doing, let's say, phishing simulations as part of your training, and you're doing those too frequently, and you're disrupting the business day, while these salespeople, accounting folks, operational researchers, et cetera, are trying to get their work done, and they have other priorities other than your phishing simulation, they will revolt because the culture is there to protect their domain of expertise and the things that they're hired to do. So if you live in an organization that champions the security awareness training and it becomes a higher and higher priority, you'll see less and less pushback. But this is one of those subjective things where you'll need to know where security awareness training fits into your organization today and where it needs to fit in tomorrow. And your frequency should be around there. Again, that's part of the reason we typically land on monthly, even though the data shows 21 days, because if you really are trying to push within 21-day windows training experiences to folks, many organizations are not there yet. and they're going to rebel and push back in order to protect their other priorities. So that's my best thought. So if you are going to try to get more frequency and in that 21-day window, I recommend starting with benchmarking your culture, having conversations with the executives, working through that buy-in process over time where you're interviewing your users, and all of that will culminate after years of pushing into a culture that actually wants the security awareness training. That's
Great. Great. Thank you. Any other questions today?
I have another question. Sorry to dominate. How do you monetize, security awareness results? So I think sometimes in business, it's, the business leaders want, the phishing activities to happen, but there's other things where they see direct correlation with the revenue or performance. So what KPIs or how do you monetize the results of what you're doing without there being a breach?
I'm not sure I completely understand your question, so I apologize if I repeat this back to you, but how do you utilize the results of your training in order to push forward with the other company's objectives?
Yeah, let me ask it a different way. How do you show that if you ran 12 campaigns in a year, that you eliminated, X amount of dollars in potential losses, or you reduce risk by 50%?
Yeah, actually, I don't typically advocate for that application of the training results as a protective measure, namely because most security, the risk is actually a 0 or 1, right? It's hey, your company has existed another year, you were secure enough, good for you. That kind of thing. It's a kind of a yes or no, especially for small businesses, which is a large part of the efforts and the work that our psychological security aims at, the small and mid-sized businesses. I would actually argue that taking the results of your 12 phishing campaigns is something that you can package in such a way that shows the results, and it either buys transparency with your clients or your prospects. It can help buy opportunities to start a discussion, and it actually becomes a great sales and prospecting tool for organizations of all different types, whether they're accountants or manufacturers, etc. Because by bringing forward the results of your security awareness training, you become a thought leader naturally in all these other industries. So my argument is your KPI should be finding home within first your revenue systems, and then secondly your HR systems, which are you can recruit better people because they know that they're coming to a culture that is going to take employee training seriously, and it's a great bragging point when you're trying to recruit talent to your organization. So that's usually where I advocate for the application of KPIs. But yeah, I don't have the data on how to utilize KPIs on proving that a loss did not occur because of the training.